I'm so glad you could join me this evening. You found your way to Science Blanket, your quiet space for the unseen. Have you ever walked through a still, ancient grove and felt like you were stepping into a slow-motion dream? Tonight, we're wrapping ourselves in the science of the hidden pulse, specifically, the vast, subterranean network known as the Wood Wide Web. We often think of trees as solitary giants, but they are actually ghosts of the forest floor, trillions of fungal threads suspended in a delicate balance between the sunlight above and the dark minerals below. From the high, delicate filaments of mycelium that look like pulled silk to the heavy, interconnected roots that bring the weight of the mountain, this living map is the visible signature of the forest's invisible conversation. As we begin, imagine yourself resting on a bed of soft, damp needles, feeling as connected and supported as the trees themselves. You don't need to understand the biology of symbiotic relationships or the names of the nutrient cycles tonight. Just let the slow, steady hum of the Earth's hidden pathways tuck you in. If this blanket of the deep forest helps you find your peace, I invite you to subscribe and join our community of sleepy explorers. Now, take a slow, deep breath. Feel your lungs expand and then empty, as steady as the rising sap. Let the weight of your day filter down into the cool, dark soil beneath you. Relax your jaw, let your shoulders drop, and sink into the softness of your bed. Let's explore the quiet wonders of the Wood Wide Web together. Beneath your feet, beneath the carpet of fallen leaves and the dark layer of humus, beneath the visible roots that anchor the towering giants above, there exists a world so intricate and so vast that it challenges everything we thought we knew about forests. This is a world of connection, of communication, of cooperation on a scale that seems almost impossible to comprehend. It's a world where trees, those solitary pillars reaching toward the sky, are not solitary at all. They are part of something much larger, something that has been quietly operating beneath our notice for hundreds of millions of years. Imagine walking through a forest, any forest, and looking up at the canopy above. Each tree seems to stand alone, separated by space, competing for light, reaching upward in what appears to be an individual struggle for survival. But if you could somehow peel back the layers of soil, if you could see what lies hidden in the darkness below, you would discover that these trees are not separate entities at all. They are connected, linked together through an underground network so complex and so sophisticated that scientists have given it a name that captures both its function and its wonder: the Wood Wide Web. This isn't metaphor or poetry, though it certainly sounds like both. This is science, hard science, revealing something that sounds like it belongs in the realm of fantasy. Trees connect underground through mycorrhizal fungal networks, forming this Wood Wide Web, and in healthy forests, nearly every tree connects to others through these shared systems. Think about that for a moment. Nearly every tree. Not some trees, not a few trees, but nearly all of them, joined together in a living network that spans the entire forest floor. At the heart of this network lies something called mycelium, and if you've never encountered this word before, prepare to be amazed. Mycelium consists of fungal threads, incredibly fine filaments that spread through the soil like a living tapestry. These threads wrap around tree roots, sometimes gently embracing them, sometimes actually boring into the roots themselves, forming the core network structure that allows this entire system to function. When you see a mushroom pushing up through the forest floor, you're looking at just the tip of something enormous. Those mushrooms, beautiful as they may be, are only the fruiting bodies of the fungus. The real organism, the vast bulk of it, lies underground as mycelium, spreading through the soil in every direction, connecting, linking, binding the forest together. The scale of this underground world is difficult to grasp. Consider this. 1 teaspoon of forest soil, just 1 small teaspoon, can contain several miles of fungal filaments. Miles. Packed into a space you could balance on your thumb. Now expand that thought to encompass an entire forest, acres upon acres of soil, each handful containing this impossible density of threads. A single mycorrhizal network can span kilometers, stretching under your feet as you walk, connecting not dozens but hundreds of trees into one integrated system. What's even more remarkable is how this network is structured. Scientists studying these systems have discovered that mycorrhizal networks don't just form random tangles of connections. They organize themselves into what are called scale-free, small-world topologies. These are the same kinds of network structures you find in highly efficient communication systems, the kind of architecture that allows information to travel quickly and reliably across vast distances. Nature, it seems, figured out optimal network design long before humans ever thought about telephone lines or the internet. This Wood Wide Web is ancient beyond our easy comprehension. Mycorrhizal networks originated around 400 million years ago, back in a time when the Earth looked nothing like it does today. To put that in perspective, 400 million years ago, there were no flowers, no birds, no dinosaurs. The land was largely barren, a harsh environment that plants were only beginning to colonize. And these partnerships, these fungal connections between early plants and mycorrhizal fungi, these were part of what made that colonization possible. The fungi helped plants extract nutrients from poor soil, helped them access water, helped them survive in conditions that would have been impossible to endure alone. In return, the plants provided the fungi with sugars, with energy captured from sunlight. It was cooperation at the most fundamental level, and it helped transform the entire planet. Today, as you move from one forest to another, from one part of the world to another, you'll find that different fungal types dominate different forest biomes. The mycorrhizal networks beneath a temperate oak forest differ from those under tropical rainforest canopies, which differ again from the networks threading through northern boreal forests. Each ecosystem has evolved its own particular community of fungal partners, each adapted to the specific conditions, the specific trees, the specific soil chemistry of that place. It's a reminder that the Wood Wide Web isn't one single network, but countless networks, each unique, each shaped by millions of years of evolution in particular places. As you lie here, perhaps preparing to sleep, perhaps simply listening and learning, consider that every forest you've ever walked through contained this hidden dimension. Every peaceful grove, every stand of trees, every woodland path was suspended above this intricate underground internet. The trees weren't just trees. They were nodes in a network, participants in a conversation you couldn't hear, members of a community that extended far beyond what your eyes could see. The quiet forest was never truly quiet. Beneath the surface, there was constant communication, constant exchange, constant connection. And this is only the beginning of the story, only the first glimpse into a world that scientists are still working to understand, still marveling at, still discovering new wonders within. The Wood Wide Web is real, it is vast, and it has been operating beneath our feet all along, waiting for us to notice, waiting for us to understand just how connected the natural world truly is. The connections running beneath the forest floor are not merely structural. They are not simply threads linking one tree to another in some passive network. These fungal highways are active, dynamic, constantly moving resources from one place to another, facilitating exchanges that keep the entire forest healthy and resilient. When we talk about the Wood Wide Web, we're talking about a transportation system, a distribution network that would put many human logistics operations to shame. Through these mycorrhizal networks, trees share water and nutrients with one another. Let that sink in for a moment. Trees, which we've always thought of as independent organisms competing for resources, are actually sharing those very resources through underground channels. When one tree has access to abundant water, perhaps because it's growing near a stream or in a depression where moisture collects, some of that water can move through the fungal network to other trees that might be struggling through a dry patch. The same is true for nutrients. Carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, the fundamental building blocks of life, move through these fungal connections from tree to tree. But it's not just the major nutrients making these journeys. Micronutrients, those elements needed in smaller quantities but still essential for survival, also travel via the network. Zinc and manganese, along with other trace elements, flow through the fungal threads, finding their way to where they're needed most. The fungi act as both transporters and traders, moving these substances through the soil in ways that tree roots alone could never accomplish. And this is where the fungi truly earn their place in this partnership. Tree roots can only reach so far, can only penetrate certain types of soil, can only access nutrients within a limited radius of where they grow. But fungal hyphae, those incredibly fine threads that make up the mycelium, extend deeper than roots into compacted soils, into tiny spaces between soil particles, into regions that roots could never reach. They probe and search and explore, finding pockets of nutrients, locating water, accessing resources that would otherwise remain locked away and unavailable. Then, through the network, they transport these resources back to the trees. The movement of resources through the Wood Wide Web follows what scientists call source sink gradients. This is a beautifully simple principle with profound implications. Resources move from areas of abundance, the sources, to areas of scarcity, the sinks. A tree that's thriving, that has plenty of nutrients and water, becomes a source. A tree that's struggling, that's stressed by drought or poor soil or disease, becomes a sink. And the network naturally moves resources from rich to stressed trees, from the haves to the have-nots, creating a kind of insurance system for the entire forest community. What's particularly fascinating is that carbon moves bidirectionally between connected trees. Carbon, remember, is the fundamental currency of life for plants. They capture it from the air during photosynthesis, using sunlight to transform carbon dioxide into sugars that fuel their growth. You might think that trees would hoard this precious resource, that they would never willingly share the carbon they worked so hard to capture. But they do. Carbon flows from one tree to another through the fungal network, and it doesn't just flow in one direction. It moves back and forth, creating a dynamic exchange that responds to the changing needs of different trees at different times. This exchange even varies with the seasons. Seasonal carbon exchange occurs between different species, which means that the Wood Wide Web doesn't just connect individual trees of the same kind. It connects entire forest communities, linking oaks to maples, pines to birches, creating interspecies partnerships that blur the lines between competition and cooperation. In spring, when deciduous trees are just leafing out and haven't yet ramped up their photosynthesis, evergreen trees that have been photosynthesizing all winter might send carbon their way. Later in the summer, when the deciduous trees are in full leaf and producing abundant sugars, the flow might reverse. The forest balances itself, the whole system working together to ensure that all members of the community have what they need. Sometimes, nutrients enter the forest system in unexpected ways. In the Pacific Northwest, scientists have discovered that trees near salmon streams absorb marine nitrogen through fungi. Think about the journey that nitrogen takes. It starts in the ocean, incorporated into the bodies of salmon. Those salmon swim upstream to spawn, and when they die, their bodies decompose, releasing nitrogen into the soil. The mycorrhizal fungi absorb that nitrogen and transport it to the trees, connecting the marine ecosystem to the forest ecosystem in a chain of relationships that spans the boundary between water and land. The trees growing along those streams literally contain atoms that once swam through the ocean, a reminder that everything in nature is connected, often in ways we never suspected. For young trees just beginning their lives, these networks are not just helpful, they're essential. When a seed germinates and a new seedling pushes its way up through the soil, it faces enormous challenges. It's small, vulnerable, competing with established plants for light and resources. But if it can tap into an existing mycorrhizal network, what scientists call a CMN or common mycorrhizal network, it gains an immediate advantage. These CMNs provide faster inoculation to seedlings than soil spores would. Instead of waiting for fungal spores in the soil to germinate and slowly form new fungal partnerships, the seedling can plug directly into an existing network, gaining instant access to the fungal highway system and all the benefits it provides. And those benefits are substantial. Seedlings connected to mature trees show boosted photosynthesis. They actually perform better at the fundamental process of capturing energy from sunlight and turning it into growth. Why? Because through the network, they're receiving support from the older trees around them. They might be getting extra nutrients that help them build more chlorophyll. They might be getting water during dry spells that would otherwise slow their growth. They might even be getting carbon itself, subsidies from the larger trees that help them survive in the deep shade of the forest understory where light is scarce and photosynthesis is difficult. This is not competition. This is not survival of the fittest in the harsh, individualistic sense we often imagine. This is community, cooperation, mutual support operating on a scale that encompasses entire forests. The Wood Wide Web is showing us that trees are not isolated individuals struggling alone, but members of a vast cooperative network where resources flow, where help is provided, where the strong support the weak, and where even the youngest and smallest members of the community receive aid from their elders. Beneath every footstep you take in a forest, this incredible exchange is happening, resources flowing, connections pulsing, the whole system working together in ways that we're only beginning to understand. Within these vast underground networks, not all trees are equal. Some trees occupy special positions, serve special roles, act as anchors and organizers for the entire system. Scientists have begun calling these trees mother trees, and the name is more than just poetic. These are typically the oldest, largest trees in the forest, the ones that have been growing for decades or even centuries, sending their roots deep and wide, forming connections with countless fungal partners, becoming central nodes in the Wood Wide Web. Mother trees act as hubs with the most extensive connections, and from these hubs, they coordinate much of what happens in the forest community around them. The relationship between mother trees and the younger generation growing in their shadow is remarkable. In the deep shade beneath a mature forest canopy, light is a precious commodity. Saplings struggling to grow in this dim environment often can't photosynthesize efficiently enough to support themselves. They should, by all rights, starve. But they don't, because mother trees send sugars to shaded saplings unable to photosynthesize adequately. Through the mycorrhizal network, the older trees literally feed the younger ones, providing them with the carbon they need to survive until they can reach a gap in the canopy, until more light becomes available, until they can stand on their own. Water, too, flows from old to young. Mother trees, with their massive root systems developed over many years, access deeper soil water than younger trees can reach. They tap into moisture reserves far below the surface, stores of water that persist even during dry periods. And then they redistribute this water to saplings through the fungal network, sharing this vital resource with the next generation. It's a form of irrigation, a way of buffering the entire forest community against drought and stress. But mother trees don't just provide resources. They also shape the competitive environment around their offspring. Trees engage in root competition, each one trying to occupy soil space and access nutrients. This competition can be fierce, limiting what's available to seedlings trying to establish themselves. Yet mother trees reduce root competition around kin seedlings. They pull back, they give their offspring space, they create conditions that allow their own children to thrive. It's a deliberate act, a choice that costs the mother tree something but benefits the next generation. And here's where the story becomes even more intriguing. Trees can recognize their relatives. They can somehow distinguish between their own offspring and unrelated seedlings growing nearby. The mechanisms behind this recognition are still being studied, but the effects are clear. Trees recognize relatives and preferentially send them more carbon through the mycorrhizal network. They discriminate, playing favorites, ensuring that their own genetic legacy has the best possible chance of survival. This preferential treatment has measurable effects. Kin seedlings show higher mycorrhizal colonization and receive more micronutrients than non-kin seedlings growing in the same area. They develop more extensive fungal partnerships, gain access to more resources, establish themselves more successfully. In some species, the difference is dramatic. Studies on Douglas fir have shown that kin seedlings receive twice the carbon of strangers, a massive subsidy that gives them a significant advantage in the competitive forest environment. Now, this doesn't mean that being related is always advantageous. The benefits of kinship seem to depend on context. Non-kin may actually survive better in fields, in open areas where competition is less intense and where the support of a mother tree matters less. But in the laboratory, in controlled conditions that may better mirror the challenging environment of a dense forest, kin gain clear advantages. The wood wide web, it seems, matters most when conditions are difficult, when resources are scarce, when survival depends on cooperation and support rather than just individual vigor. The communication flowing through these networks goes beyond just the passive movement of resources. Mother trees appear to respond to signals, to distress calls from other trees in the network. When a seedling is under attack from insects, when it's suffering from drought stress, when it's struggling with disease, it releases chemical signals. These signals can travel through the air, but they also move through the soil, through the fungal network, reaching the mother trees. And the mother trees respond. They dispatch nutrients in response to these distress signals, directing resources toward the trees that need them most urgently. It's a form of triage, an allocation system that prioritizes help for those in crisis. The presence of mother trees shapes the entire character of a forest. Forests with abundant mother trees show higher resilience. They bounce back better from disturbances, recover more quickly from drought or disease outbreaks, maintain their stability in the face of stress. This resilience isn't just about the individual strength of those large old trees, though that certainly matters. It's about the network they maintain, the support they provide, the way they hold the entire community together through their connections. Remove the mother trees, and you're not just cutting down large, old individuals. You're removing the hubs of the network, breaking the connections that hold the forest together, eliminating the sources of support that younger trees depend on. You're unraveling the wood wide web itself. This is why old-growth forests, forests that still contain their ancient mother trees, are so valuable and so difficult to replace. You can plant new trees, but you can't quickly recreate the network, can't instantly restore the relationships, can't replicate the accumulated wisdom, if we can call it that, of trees that have been coordinating with their community for hundreds of years. As you listen to these words, perhaps feeling yourself drifting towards sleep, imagine those mother trees standing in the darkness, their roots spread wide beneath them, their fungal partners extending in all directions, connecting them to hundreds of other trees. Imagine the constant flow of resources, the carbon and water and nutrients moving through those connections, the signals passing back and forth, the old trees caring for the young, the whole system working together. The forest is not a collection of individuals. It's a family, a community, a network of relationships where the oldest and largest members take on the responsibility of nurturing and protecting those who come after them. The Wood Wide Web is not just a communication system. It's a support system, a way of ensuring that knowledge, resources, and care pass from one generation to the next, keeping the forest alive and resilient through whatever challenges may come. The Wood Wide Web is not just a system for sharing resources. It's also a communication network, a way for trees to send warnings, to share information about threats, to coordinate their defenses across the entire forest. When a tree comes under attack, when insects begin chewing its leaves or boring into its bark, when disease takes hold or drought begins to stress its systems, that tree doesn't suffer in silence. It sends out signals, chemical messages that travel through the soil, through the mycorrhizal network, alerting its neighbors to the danger. These attacked trees emit underground chemical defense signals, broadcasting an alarm that spreads through the wood wide web like ripples across a pond. The distress signals warn neighbors of drought, disease, or insects, giving other trees advance notice of threats before those threats arrive at their own roots and trunks. It's an early warning system, a way for the forest community to prepare, to activate defenses, to mount a coordinated response to danger. The signals themselves are surprisingly diverse and sophisticated. They include chemicals, hormones, and even electrical pulses, a variety of communication methods that ensure the message gets through. Different signals may convey different kinds of information, may trigger different responses, may travel at different speeds through the network. The forest, it turns out, speaks multiple languages, uses multiple channels, employs a rich vocabulary of chemical and electrical communication that we're only beginning to decipher. Some of these signals move relatively slowly. Alarm signals travel through roots at about 1 centimeter per minute, which sounds quite gradual until you remember that roots can extend for many meters through the soil. Even at this pace, stress signals can move through networks in under 6 hours, meaning that a tree attacked at dawn can have its neighbors fully warned and preparing their defenses by afternoon. For organisms that live on timescales of decades and centuries, 6 hours is remarkably fast, fast enough to make a real difference in survival. And the warnings work. Trees that receive these signals don't just passively register the information. They act on it. Pines connected by fungi activate their defenses faster when they receive warning signals through the mycorrhizal network. They ramp up production of defensive compounds, prepare their immune systems, ready themselves for the attack they know is coming. It's the biological equivalent of hearing sirens and taking shelter before the storm arrives. Different species respond in different ways. Beech trees, for instance, increase their production of bitter tannins after receiving warnings from kin. These tannins make the leaves less palatable to insects, less nutritious, harder to digest. An insect that might have happily munched its way through an unprepared beech tree will find warned beech leaves much less appealing. The tree hasn't been touched yet, hasn't been damaged, but it's already defending itself based solely on the warning it received through the network. The chemical communication doesn't only travel underground. Trees also release volatile organic compounds into the air, gaseous signals that drift from tree to tree above ground. These airborne messages prime defenses in neighbors, preparing them to respond more quickly and more effectively if they do come under attack. The forest uses every available channel, every possible route, to share information and coordinate responses. Even the electrical signals are fascinating. When trees are cut or wounded, electrical pulses race through their tissues in patterns that researchers say mimic the signals seen in wounded animals. There's something almost nervous system-like about these responses, a suggestion that plants have their own ways of experiencing and responding to harm, their own forms of signaling that parallel the neural activity we see in creatures with brains. The boundaries between plant and animal, between different forms of life and awareness, become blurrier the more we learn. What's particularly intriguing is that behavioral responses depend on neighbor identity. Trees don't respond the same way to all warnings. They pay more attention to signals from kin, from relatives, than they do to warnings from strangers. They might mount a stronger defense or respond more quickly when the warning comes from a tree they're related to. It's as if they trust family more, as if kinship matters not just for resource sharing but also for communication, for the networks of trust and cooperation that allow coordinated defense. This is community defense, collective security on a scale that encompasses entire forest stands. When one tree detects a threat, the whole neighborhood can prepare. When insects attack one individual, dozens of others activate their chemical defenses, making the entire area less hospitable to the invaders. The Wood Wide Web transforms a forest from a collection of vulnerable individuals into a coordinated defensive network, where information flows as freely as nutrients, where warnings spread as readily as water, where every tree can benefit from the vigilance of its neighbors. Imagine yourself surrounded by trees, standing in a forest in the quiet hours of evening. Above you, leaves rustle in the breeze. Around you, trunks rise toward the darkening sky. But beneath your feet, invisible and silent to your senses, messages are flowing. A tree on the far side of the forest detects the chemical signature of beetle larvae boring into its bark. Within minutes, signals begin to spread through the mycorrhizal network, traveling through fungal threads, passing from root to root, carrying the warning outward in all directions. Trees hundreds of meters away begin ramping up their defenses, even though no insect has touched them yet, even though the threat is still distant. They're preparing, coordinating, working together to protect the community. The forest is talking, constantly, urgently, sharing information that means the difference between life and death, between successful defense and devastating damage. Every tree is both a sender and a receiver, both a broadcaster of warnings and a listener for alarms. The wood wide web pulses with chemical signals, electrical impulses, molecular messages flowing through the darkness of the soil. It's a conversation we can't hear, conducted in languages we're only beginning to understand, but it's happening all around us, all the time, keeping the forest alive and responsive and resilient in the face of countless threats. The trees are not mute. They're not isolated. They're talking to each other, warning each other, helping each other survive, connected through the ancient network that runs beneath everything, binding them together into something greater than any individual tree could ever be alone. The sophistication of plant communication and response goes far beyond simple alarm systems. Trees have developed the ability to distinguish between different kinds of damage, to read the signatures of various threats, and to tailor their responses accordingly. When a branch breaks in a storm, when a deer rubs its antlers against bark, when wind tears a leaf, trees register this as mechanical damage. But when an insect begins to feed, when caterpillar mandibles slice through leaf tissue and saliva mixes with the wound, trees recognize something different. They distinguish herbivore saliva from mechanical damage, detecting the specific chemical markers that indicate they're being eaten rather than just injured by chance. And their responses can be remarkably strategic. Elms and pines, when they detect caterpillar saliva, don't just activate general defenses. They emit specific chemical signals that summon wasps, parasitic wasps that lay their eggs in the bodies of caterpillars. The trees are essentially calling in reinforcements, recruiting predators to attack the herbivores that are attacking them. It's a three-way interaction, a manipulation of the food web that turns the tree from passive victim into active participant in its own defense. Larger herbivores trigger different responses. When giraffes browse on acacia trees in the African savanna, those acacias emit ethylene signals after the giraffe has moved on. These gaseous warnings drift downwind to other acacias, which respond by increasing the tannin content in their leaves, making themselves less palatable before the giraffe even reaches them. The giraffe, if it's paying attention, learns to move upwind or to skip trees and feed from individuals farther away, avoiding the worn trees that have already prepared their defenses. Trees even respond to the presence of their neighbors in ways that go beyond chemical communication. They adjust their crown growth to avoid shading neighbors, a phenomenon that creates what's sometimes called crown shyness, where the upper branches of adjacent trees don't quite touch, leaving gaps in the canopy that allow light to filter through to lower levels. It's a form of politeness, perhaps, or at least a way of reducing direct competition, allowing neighboring trees to coexist more peacefully by ensuring each gets its share of sunlight. The communication between trees includes modalities we barely understand. Researchers have discovered that trees emit root crackling sounds around 220 Hz, ultrasonic clicks and pops that may carry information through the soil. Whether other trees can hear these sounds, whether they respond to them, remains uncertain. But the existence of acoustic signals adds yet another layer to the complexity of underground communication, another channel through which information might flow. It's tempting to romanticize all of this, to imagine the forest as a peaceful commune where everyone cooperates for the common good. But the reality is more nuanced, more interesting, and perhaps more honest. Plants often eavesdrop on signals rather than altruistically warning their neighbors. When a tree releases chemical alarms, it may be doing so primarily to activate its own systemic defenses, to prime its own tissues throughout its body. The fact that neighbors can detect and respond to these signals might be a side effect, an exploitation of information that was never intended as a public service announcement. One tree's alarm is another tree's intelligence gathering, and there's no particular reason to assume that sharing information is the primary goal. The mycorrhizal networks themselves facilitate both cooperation and competition. Allele chemicals, toxic compounds that trees produce to inhibit the growth of competitors, can move through networks. A tree might release chemicals into the soil that harm the seedlings of other species, and the fungal connections can transport these chemical weapons to their targets. The same network that shares water and nutrients can also carry poisons, can be used for warfare as easily as for mutual aid. All of this challenges our traditional views of nature as purely competitive, as a ruthless struggle where only the strongest survive and every organism is out for itself alone. The Wood Wide Web shows us something more complex, more textured, less easily categorized. Commensal, parasitic, and mutualistic interactions coexist within the same networks, often involving the same individuals at the same time. A tree might be helping one neighbor while poisoning another, receiving carbon from a mother tree while being drained by a fungus, supporting its kin while being exploited by a non-relative. And exploitation is definitely part of the story. Not every organism connected to the mycorrhizal network plays by the same rules. Some species have evolved to take advantage of the system without contributing anything in return. Orchids, for instance, particularly in their early stages of growth, and plants called mycorrhizatrophs, which have lost the ability to photosynthesize entirely, steal carbon from the networks. They tap into the fungal connections and extract sugars that other trees work to produce, living as thieves in the system, parasites on the Wood Wide Web. These ghost plants, as mycorrhizatrophs are sometimes called, are pale and strange, lacking the chlorophyll that gives most plants their green color. They grow in the deep shade of forest floors, places where photosynthesis would be impossible anyway. But they survive and even thrive by plugging into the network and drawing energy from the community around them. They're cheaters in a sense, but they're also a reminder that complex systems always have loopholes, always have individuals who find ways to game the rules, to take without giving. Does this make the Wood Wide Web less remarkable? Not at all. If anything, it makes it more interesting, more realistic, more like actual communities everywhere. Human societies, too, involve cooperation and competition, altruism and selfishness, helpers and cheaters all mixed together. The forest is not a utopia. It's a real ecosystem with real organisms pursuing their own survival in whatever ways they can. Some of those strategies involve cooperation. Some involve competition. Some involve exploitation. And all of these strategies coexist, woven together through the fungal networks that connect everyone, that provide opportunities for both mutual benefit and parasitism, that enable communication even when that communication is sometimes honest and sometimes deceptive. The Wood Wide Web is morally neutral. It's simply a network, a set of connections that organisms can use in various ways. What matters is that the network exists, that it's real, that it shapes how forests function in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. Whether trees are being altruistic or selfish, whether they're cooperating or competing, whether they're helping or harming each other, they're doing it all through these underground connections. They're engaged with each other, responding to each other, affecting each other's fates in ways that make the old view of trees as isolated individuals seem almost absurdly simplistic. The forest is a network, a community, a system of relationships where every member affects and is affected by the others, where cooperation and competition intertwine, where the story is always more complex than any simple narrative of conflict or harmony could capture. When a tree nears the end of its life, When disease or age or injury has pushed it beyond the point of recovery, something extraordinary happens. The tree doesn't simply shut down and collapse. Instead, dying trees redistribute their remaining resources before death. They send what's left of their stored carbon, their accumulated nutrients, their last reserves of energy out through the mycorrhizal network to their neighbors. It's a final gift, a way of ensuring that the resources they gathered over their lifetime don't go to waste, that they return to the community that supported them. Whether this is intentional or simply the automatic result of source sink dynamics, as the dying tree becomes a sink and releases its stores, the effect is the same. Death feeds life. One generation nourishes the next. But sometimes, trees don't quite die at all, not completely. Throughout European forests, researchers have found beech stumps that were cut 400 to 500 years ago, half a millennium in the past, that remain alive. Not just present, not just slowly decaying, but genuinely alive, their tissues still living, still functioning. These stumps have no leaves, no branches, no way to photosynthesize. They should have died within months of being cut. Yet they persist, century after century, sustained entirely by their neighbors through the mycorrhizal network. On the other side of the world, in New Zealand, there's a 500-year-old kauri stump that survives entirely on shared nutrients from surrounding trees. Scientists have measured the flow of water and carbon into this ancient remnant, confirming that it's not just barely hanging on but actually thriving in its own way, maintained by the forest community it once belonged to. The other trees keep it alive, sharing their photosynthetic products with this stump that can no longer produce its own. It's kept as a member of the community even though it can no longer contribute in the traditional ways, a form of care that persists across centuries. The networks themselves show interesting patterns of organization. In some forests, different species form somewhat separate networks. Western red cedar and maple, for instance, share one network that remains separate from the network connecting hemlocks. It's not absolute segregation. There's overlap and connection between these systems, but there are preferences, tendencies for certain species to associate more closely with particular fungal partners and, through those partners, with each other. The wood wide web isn't one undifferentiated tangle. It has structure, communities within communities, clusters of stronger connections interspersed with weaker links that bridge between different groups. Yet cross-species cooperation is common and beneficial. Different species cooperate through shared fungal highways, and these partnerships often involve complementary traits that benefit everyone involved. Douglas fir seedlings, for example, grow better when planted near birches. The two species, one evergreen and one deciduous, have different seasonal patterns, different nutrient needs, different ways of interacting with the soil. Together, connected through shared mycorrhizal partners, they create conditions that benefit both, each one contributing something the other lacks, the diversity of the partnership creating resilience that neither could achieve alone. Proving that these benefits flow through the fungal network rather than through some other mechanism required careful experimentation. Scientists have conducted mesh barrier experiments, installing fine mesh barriers in the soil that prevent roots from crossing but allow fungal hyphae to pass through. These experiments confirm that fungi-only connections are sufficient for defense signal transfer and resource exchange. Even when roots can't physically touch, when trees are separated by barriers, they can still communicate, still share resources, still coordinate their defenses, as long as the fungal connections remain intact. The fungi are not just passive conduits. They're essential mediators, the infrastructure that makes the entire system work. Of course, the fungi don't do all this for free. They're not selfless servants of the trees. Fungi retain about 30% of the tree sugars that flow through them as payment for their services. It's a substantial commission, nearly a third of the carbon that trees work so hard to capture. But it's a price the trees evidently find worth paying, because the benefits they receive in return, the access to water and nutrients, the expanded reach of their root systems, the connection to the network, all of this more than compensates for the carbon they give up. The relationship between fungi and trees is not without tension. The fungi want to extract as much carbon as possible from their plant hosts. The trees want to provide as little as necessary while still maintaining the partnership. This creates a push and pull, a negotiation at the cellular level. Fungal effector proteins suppress plant defenses to facilitate colonization, to allow the fungus to penetrate root tissues and establish the connection. The trees, for their part, have to carefully regulate their immune responses, learning to tolerate the presence of beneficial fungi while still defending against truly pathogenic organisms. It's a delicate balance, maintained through molecular signaling that has been refined over millions of years of coevolution. The fungi themselves are constantly evolving, constantly adapting to changing conditions. Fungal genets, the individual genetic lineages of fungi, evolve rapidly, their short generation times and enormous reproductive output allowing them to adapt much faster than the trees they partner with. This rapid evolution aids adaptation, allowing the fungal community to respond to environmental changes, to new stresses, to shifting conditions in ways that benefit the entire system. When the climate shifts, when new diseases appear, when soil chemistry changes, the fungi can evolve new capabilities, new tolerances, new strategies, and these innovations become available to all the trees connected to the network. So the wood wide web is not static. It's not a fixed structure built once and unchanging. It's a living system, constantly growing, constantly adapting, constantly shifting in response to the needs and opportunities of the moment. Old stumps remain connected for centuries. New seedlings plug in and begin receiving support within weeks. Resources flow from the dying to the living. Different species form partnerships that benefit everyone involved. Fungi and trees negotiate the terms of their relationship, sometimes cooperating, sometimes in tension, always engaged in an evolutionary dance that has been going on since plants first moved onto land. As you lie here listening, as your breathing slows and sleep begins to approach, think about those ancient stumps still alive in the forest, fed by their neighbors for 500 years. Think about the Douglas fir seedlings thriving because they're growing near birches. Think about the fungi taking their 30% cut, the price of doing business in the wood wide web. Think about the rapid evolution of fungal partners, constantly adapting, constantly finding new ways to serve and to exploit their plant hosts. The forest is old, but it's not unchanging. It's ancient, but it's not stuck in the past. It's a living system, flexible and responsive, held together by connections that persist across centuries while remaining capable of adapting to whatever challenges the future might bring. The wood wide web endures, and through it, the forest endures, generation after generation, connected beneath the soil in ways that transcend the lifespan of any individual tree. The mycorrhizal networks that connect trees underground are not all the same. Different types of fungi form different kinds of partnerships, use different strategies for colonization, dominate different ecosystems around the world. Understanding these differences helps reveal why forests in different parts of the planet function the way they do, why some ecosystems respond to stress in certain ways while others show different patterns of resilience and adaptation. In the cool temperate forests of North America and Europe, in the vast boreal forests that circle the Arctic, stretching across Canada and Scandinavia and Siberia, one type of fungal partnership dominates. Ectomycorrhizal fungi, often shortened to EM fungi, are the primary architects of the wood wide web in these regions. These fungi form connections by wrapping around the outside of tree roots, creating a sheath of fungal tissue that surrounds the root tip, with hyphal threads extending outward into the soil and inward between root cells. They don't actually penetrate the cells themselves, but they get close, forming an intimate interface where nutrients and carbon can be exchanged. But ectomycorrhizal fungi, despite their dominance in northern forests, are actually relative newcomers in evolutionary terms. The more ancient partnership, the ancestral form of mycorrhizal association, involves what are called arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, or AM fungi. These fungi are globally common, found in nearly every ecosystem on Earth, and they represent the original strategy that helped plants colonize land 400 million years ago. AM fungi work differently than EM fungi. They actually penetrate root cells, forming intricate branching structures called arbuscules inside the cells themselves. These arbuscules, tree-like structures at the microscopic level, massively increase the surface area for exchange between plant and fungus, allowing efficient transfer of nutrients and carbon at the cellular level. The global distribution of these two fungal types reveals interesting patterns. Arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi dominate grasslands and tropical forests, thriving in warm climates where temperatures stay relatively constant throughout the year. In contrast, ectomycorrhizal fungi prevail in boreal and temperate woodlands, in places where there are strong seasonal changes, where winters freeze the soil and summers bring growth and activity. The two strategies seem adapted to different environmental conditions, different challenges, different opportunities. The numbers tell a striking story. About 80% of trees in cold regions associate with ectomycorrhizal fungi. In a boreal forest, in a temperate woodland, the vast majority of trees you encounter will have ectomycorrhizal partnerships. But globally, the picture reverses. Around 90% of global tree species link to arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. This is because the tropics, with their incredible diversity of tree species and their year-round growing conditions, contain far more tree species overall than the northern forests, and most of those tropical trees use the ancestral AM strategy. Specific tree species show strong preferences for one type of partnership or the other. Oak and pine, two genera that dominate many northern temperate forests, form vast ectomycorrhizal networks. Walk through an oak-pine forest and you're walking above an EM-dominated system, where the familiar mushrooms you might see fruiting from the soil, the boletes and russulas and amanitas, are the reproductive structures of the ectomycorrhizal partners below. These fungi form networks that can link thousands of trees across kilometers of forest floor. Other common temperate trees take a different approach. Maple and cedar prefer arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi inside their root cells, using the more ancient strategy even though they're growing in ecosystems where EM fungi dominate overall. This creates interesting dynamics, forests where different trees are participating in somewhat different networks, connected through different fungal partners, each drawing on different aspects of the fungal community in the soil. And some trees rely on partnerships that aren't mycorrhizal at all, at least not in the traditional sense. Legumes, the family that includes peas and beans, and also many trees like acacias and locusts and mesquites, associate with nitrogen-fixing bacteria. These bacteria, primarily from the genus Rhizobium, colonize root nodules and convert atmospheric nitrogen into forms that plants can use. It's a different kind of symbiosis, but it serves a similar purpose, extending the tree's capabilities beyond what it could accomplish with roots alone, allowing it to access a crucial nutrient, nitrogen, that's often limiting in many ecosystems. Interestingly, these nitrogen-fixing microbes thrive in hot, dry regions. In deserts and savannas, in Mediterranean climates and tropical dry forests, legume trees with their bacterial partners often dominate. They have an advantage in these harsh environments because nitrogen is frequently scarce in dry soils, and the ability to manufacture their own nitrogen through their bacterial partnerships allows them to grow where other trees struggle. The nitrogen they fix doesn't just benefit the legumes themselves. Some of it leaks into the soil, becomes available to neighboring plants, enriches the entire ecosystem, making legumes into keystone species that transform the environments where they grow. So the underground world varies from place to place, shaped by climate, by evolutionary history, by the particular tree species and fungal communities that have developed in each region. A boreal forest is networked differently than a tropical rainforest. An oak woodland functions differently than a grassland, even though both contain mycorrhizal networks. The basic principle, the idea of underground connection and cooperation, remains the same. But the details, the specific fungi involved, the way resources flow, the structure of the networks, all of this varies depending on where you are in the world. This variation is part of what makes ecosystems resilient. Different strategies work in different places. The ecto-mycorrhizal approach that dominates northern forests might not work well in the tropics. The arbuscular mycorrhizal partnerships of tropical trees might be less effective in environments with harsh winters. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria provide advantages in nitrogen-poor soils but might be less beneficial where nitrogen is abundant. The diversity of strategies, the multiple ways that plants and fungi and bacteria have found to cooperate, means that wherever you go, whatever the conditions, there's likely to be a partnership that works, a network that can form, a community that can establish itself and thrive. The Wood Wide Web, then, is not one thing but many things, a collection of different strategies and partnerships all operating under the same basic principle of underground connection. Whether you're standing in a pine forest in Canada, an oak woodland in Germany, a tropical rainforest in Brazil, or a savanna in Kenya, there's a network beneath your feet. The fungi involved might be different, the bacteria might play different roles, the structure and function might vary in important ways, but the fundamental reality remains. Trees are connected. They share resources. They communicate. They cooperate and compete and coexist through underground partnerships that have been refined over hundreds of millions of years. The details change, but the pattern persists, a testament to how fundamental these connections are to the way forests function all around our world. The diversity of fungi within a forest is not just a curiosity, not just an interesting detail for scientists to catalogue. It has real, measurable effects on how well forests can withstand stress and disturbance. Fungal diversity increases forest drought resistance, providing forests with a kind of insurance policy against climate variability. When a forest hosts many different species of mycorrhizal fungi, when its underground networks are rich and varied, the forest has access to a broader range of strategies for finding water, for accessing nutrients, for maintaining function even when conditions become difficult. This connection between fungal diversity and forest health has been documented in specific places, in real forests where researchers have spent years studying the relationships between trees and their fungal partners. Wytham Woods in England, an intensively studied forest where scientists have been gathering data for decades, shows direct links between fungal diversity and forest resilience. Trees in areas with more diverse fungal communities bounce back better from droughts, maintain their growth more consistently through variable weather, show fewer signs of stress during difficult years. The fungi provide options, alternatives, redundancy in the system that allows it to continue functioning even when some partnerships fail or some species struggle. Some trees are particularly dependent on their fungal partners. Scots pine, a species that often grows in nutrient-poor, acidic soils across northern Europe and Asia, depends heavily on fungi to survive in these challenging conditions. The acidic soils lock up nutrients, make them difficult for roots to access directly. Without mycorrhizal partners that can liberate nutrients from organic matter, that can extend far beyond the roots into regions of soil that roots cannot reach, Scots pine would struggle to grow in many of the places where it currently thrives. The fungi are not optional for these trees. They're essential partners without which the trees simply couldn't persist in their natural habitats. In England's Sherwood Forest, famous in legend but also valuable in ecological terms, mycorrhizal networks boost both regeneration and biodiversity. The presence of intact networks makes it easier for new trees to establish, provides support for seedlings that might otherwise fail, creates conditions where a greater variety of species can coexist. The biodiversity doesn't emerge despite the networks. It emerges because of them, facilitated by the underground connections that allow different species to occupy different niches while still sharing resources and information. Halfway around the world, in the rainforests of Queensland, Australia, researchers have discovered diverse fungal systems supporting the incredible plant diversity of those tropical ecosystems. The Queensland rainforests contain thousands of plant species, a bewildering variety of trees and shrubs and herbs all coexisting in relatively small areas. That coexistence is made possible in part by the fungal networks below, which help partition resources, facilitate different species accessing different nutrient pools, create conditions where competition is moderated by cooperation. The most important trees in these systems are often the oldest ones, the ancient individuals that have been growing for centuries. Old-growth trees create wildlife habitat in the form of hollows, cavities in their trunks and branches that provide homes for birds and mammals and insects. But their importance goes far beyond wildlife habitat. These old trees, these mother trees we discussed earlier, are the anchors of the mycorrhizal networks, the hubs that hold everything together. Removing matriarchal trees disrupts nutrient flow throughout the entire forest. It's not just that you've removed one large tree. You've removed the central switching station, the primary hub through which resources and information flow to dozens or hundreds of other trees. The impact of removing these hub trees can be severe. Loss of a single hub tree reduces the regeneration capacity of the surrounding area. Seedlings that would have received support through the network now struggle to establish. Young trees that would have been nourished through their connections to the mother tree now face resource limitation that slows their growth or kills them outright. The effect ripples through the community, touching trees that may be dozens of meters away from where the hub tree once stood. This is why logging, particularly logging that removes the largest and oldest trees, is so damaging to forest ecosystems. Logging disrupts networks and reduces seedling survival, not just in the immediate area where trees are cut but throughout the connected network. When you harvest the biggest trees, when you remove what the industry calls the most valuable timber, you're removing precisely the individuals that the forest most depends on for its long-term health and resilience. You're not just extracting wood. You're unraveling the fabric of the ecosystem, breaking connections that took decades or centuries to build. The type of mycorrhizal association that dominates a forest also affects its ability to store carbon, which has important implications for climate change. Ecto-mycorrhizal forests store more carbon than arbuscular mycorrhizal systems. This is partly because fungi produce more recalcitrant compounds, more complex molecules that resist decomposition and tend to accumulate in the soil as organic matter. It's also because the tree species that associate with fungi, the pines and oaks and beeches and spruces, tend to produce leaves and needles that decompose more slowly than the leaves of many associated tropical trees. The result is that northern temperate and boreal forests, those dominated systems, act as massive carbon sinks, storing carbon not just in their tree trunks but in their soils, in the accumulated organic matter that builds up over centuries of slow decomposition. This means that protecting northern forests, maintaining their old-growth trees, preserving their intact mycorrhizal networks is not just about biodiversity or watershed protection or aesthetics. It's also about climate stability, about keeping carbon locked away in trees and soil rather than releasing it to the atmosphere. When we log an old-growth forest, when we disrupt those ecto-mycorrhizal networks, we're not just harming the local ecosystem. We're potentially releasing stored carbon, reducing the Earth's capacity to buffer against climate change, undermining the very services that these forests provide to the entire planet. The Wood Wide Web, then, is not just fascinating biology. It has practical implications for how we manage forests, for how we think about conservation, for how we respond to the environmental challenges facing our world. Fungal diversity matters. Old trees matter. Intact networks matter. Not in some abstract, purely scientific sense, but in concrete, measurable ways that affect forest health, carbon storage, climate stability, and the survival of countless species that depend on functioning forest ecosystems. The underground connections are not separate from the above-ground forest. They're integral to how the forest works, essential to its resilience, fundamental to its ability to persist and adapt and continue providing the services that both nature and humanity depend upon. The Wood Wide Web doesn't exist in isolation from the broader environmental changes happening across our planet. As carbon dioxide levels rise in the atmosphere, as temperatures climb, as precipitation patterns shift, the underground networks respond and adapt, sometimes in ways that amplify environmental changes and sometimes in ways that buffer against them. Understanding these responses is crucial for predicting how forests will function in the future, how they'll cope with the rapidly changing conditions of the coming decades. One of the more surprising discoveries involves how fungi respond to elevated carbon dioxide. When researchers expose forests to higher CO levels, simulating the atmospheric conditions we're creating through fossil fuel emissions, they find that elevated CO causes fungi to release nutrient-priming molecules. These are compounds that help break down organic matter in the soil, liberating nutrients that have been locked away in dead plant material. It's as if the fungi sense the changing atmospheric chemistry and adjust their behavior accordingly, ramping up their nutrient acquisition efforts in response to the new conditions. Trees, too, are adjusting their relationships with fungi as CO levels rise. Studies on oaks have shown that these trees alter their root fungal behavior under future CO levels, changing how much carbon they allocate to their fungal partners, modifying the structure of their root systems, adjusting the terms of their underground partnerships. These changes are already happening in experimental settings, providing a glimpse of how forests might reorganize themselves as atmospheric chemistry continues to shift. The type of mycorrhizal association dominating a forest has implications for how that forest will respond to climate change, particularly in terms of carbon storage. Mycorrhizal fungi slow the decay of organic matter, producing enzymes and compounds that inhibit the bacteria and other fungi responsible for decomposition. This slowing of decay aids long-term carbon storage, keeping carbon locked in the soil for decades or centuries longer than it would remain in systems dominated by arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. The fungi essentially act as a brake on the carbon cycle, slowing the return of carbon to the atmosphere. But warming temperatures may disrupt this pattern. Climate models suggest that warming may replace mycorrhizal trees with faster cycling arbuscular mycorrhizal trees in many regions. As temperatures rise, as growing seasons lengthen, as conditions shift toward warmer, more tropical-like climates even in temperate zones, the trees adapted to cooler conditions may struggle. The pines and spruces and beeches, with their partnerships, may find themselves at a disadvantage compared to faster-growing associated species that can take advantage of the longer growing seasons and warmer temperatures. If this replacement occurs on a large scale, the consequences for carbon storage could be significant. The potential impacts are sobering. Some models suggest that losing mycorrhizal networks could reduce tree populations by 10% globally. That's not just a small adjustment. That's a massive shift in forest composition, a transformation that would affect everything from wildlife habitat to water cycles to the climate itself. The trees provide specific ecosystem services, support specific communities of organisms, store carbon in specific ways. Losing them means losing all of that, with consequences that ripple through entire ecosystems. Recognizing the importance of mycorrhizal associations is changing how scientists model the Earth's climate system. Incorporating mycorrhizal fungi into carbon storage models improves those models, makes them more accurate, better able to predict how much carbon forests can sequester and for how long. Early climate models treated soil carbon as a relatively simple system, but we now understand that the type of mycorrhizal fungi present makes a huge difference in soil carbon dynamics. Models that include this complexity produce different predictions, often showing that forests can store more carbon than we previously thought, but also showing that this storage capacity is vulnerable to disruption if fungal communities shift. The distribution of different microbes in soils is being mapped at increasingly fine scales, and these microbial maps are helping to refine climate predictions. By understanding where different fungal types occur, where nitrogen-fixing bacteria are abundant, where decomposer communities are most active, scientists can better predict how different regions will respond to warming, to changes in precipitation, to the various stresses that climate change will impose. The underground world, once invisible and largely ignored in climate models, is now recognized as a crucial component of the Earth system, one that must be included if we want accurate predictions of our planet's future. The distribution of these underground networks is not random. Soil nutrient loss affects where underground webs can form and how they function. In regions where intensive agriculture has depleted soil nutrients, where erosion has stripped away topsoil, where pollution has altered soil chemistry, mycorrhizal networks may be less extensive, less diverse, less capable of supporting healthy forest communities. This creates a feedback loop where degraded soils support weaker networks, which support less vigorous forests, which fail to build soil organic matter, which leads to further degradation. The recognition that underground networks influence Earth system models represents a fundamental shift in how we understand forests and their role in global ecology. For decades, we built models that focused on what we could see: trees, leaves, photosynthesis, respiration, growth rates. Now we're realizing that what happens underground is equally important, that the invisible networks of fungi and bacteria and their interactions with plant roots are driving processes that affect climate, carbon storage, nutrient cycling, and the stability of ecosystems worldwide. At the largest scale, climate dictates fungal distributions globally. Temperature and precipitation patterns determine which fungi can survive in which locations, which partnerships make sense in different environments, which strategies work best under different conditions. The global distribution of ecto-mycorrhizal versus arbuscular mycorrhizal forests is not random. It reflects millions of years of evolution and adaptation, with different fungal types specializing in different climatic zones, different seasonal patterns, different environmental challenges. As climate changes, as temperature and precipitation patterns shift, these fungal distributions will shift too. Some regions may transition from EM to AM dominance. Others may see changes in fungal diversity, in the specific species present, in the structure and function of their underground networks. These shifts will happen gradually, over decades, as individual trees die and are replaced by different species better adapted to the new conditions, as fungal communities adjust and reorganize, as new partnerships form and old ones dissolve. The wood wide web, then, is not just a feature of forests as they exist today. It's a dynamic, evolving system that will play a crucial role in determining how forests respond to the unprecedented environmental changes we're creating. The underground networks will help some forests adapt, providing flexibility and resilience that allows them to persist through changing conditions. But in other cases, the disruption of these networks, whether through direct human activity like logging or through the indirect effects of climate change, may push forests past critical thresholds, triggering rapid shifts to different ecosystem states. Understanding these networks, protecting them, considering them in our decisions about land use and forest management, may be essential for maintaining forest health and all the services forests provide in a rapidly changing world. For most of human history, the wood wide web remained completely unknown. People walked through forests, used them, studied them, managed them, all without any awareness of the vast underground networks connecting every tree. Even after scientists began discovering mycorrhizal associations in the late 1800s, even after the basic biology became understood, the full scope and scale of these networks remained hidden. Individual partnerships were studied in laboratories, specific forests were examined in detail, but no one had attempted to map the global distribution of underground networks to understand how they varied across the entire planet. That changed recently. Global mapping efforts that first charted underground networks in a comprehensive way began appearing in 2019, marking a watershed moment in our understanding of forest ecosystems. These weren't small studies of individual forest plots. They were ambitious attempts to understand patterns at continental and global scales, to reveal the hidden architecture connecting forests all around the world. The scale of data required for such mapping is staggering. One major study compiled information from over 28,000 tree species across 70 countries, an enormous data set that required years of work by international teams of researchers. They gathered data on where different tree species grow, what environmental conditions they experience, what their ecological characteristics are. They compiled climate data, soil data, information about temperature and precipitation and seasonality. And then they used what was already known about which tree species associate with which types of mycorrhizal fungi to begin building a global picture. The researchers developed algorithms that link tree and climate data to fungal types, using machine learning and statistical models to predict mycorrhizal associations even in places where fungi had never been directly sampled. If you know what trees are growing in a location, and you know the climate conditions there, you can make educated predictions about what kind of mycorrhizal networks are likely to be present underground. The algorithms allowed researchers to fill in gaps, to extend understanding beyond the relatively few places where underground fungal communities have been directly studied. The maps that emerged from this work revealed clear global patterns. Ecto-mycorrhizal webs permeate soils across North America, Europe, and Asia, dominating the temperate and boreal zones of the Northern Hemisphere. Vast networks stretch beneath the coniferous forests of Canada and Russia, beneath the deciduous forests of the eastern United States and Central Europe, beneath the mixed forests of China and Japan. These are regions where EM fungi have established themselves as the primary mycorrhizal partners, where the underground networks follow the EM blueprint we've been discussing. But the maps also showed significant differences in other regions. Tropical forests, for all their incredible above-ground diversity, form smaller, more localized underground webs compared to their northern counterparts. This doesn't mean tropical forests lack mycorrhizal networks. They have them, and they're diverse and important. But the networks tend to be structured differently, with arbuscular mycorrhizal associations dominating, with less of the long-distance connectivity that characterizes EM networks, with patterns of connection that reflect the different ecological dynamics of tropical systems. This global forest microbe map aids carbon predictions in ways that weren't possible before. Climate scientists can now incorporate realistic information about where different mycorrhizal types occur, how they affect carbon storage, how they might respond to environmental change. The maps provide a foundation for more sophisticated Earth system models, for better predictions about carbon cycling, for improved understanding of how forests will respond to the challenges ahead. The inspiration for this underground mapping came partly from other global data collection efforts. Tree census data, the painstaking work of cataloging what trees grow where across the entire planet, inspired researchers to think about underground mapping. If we could map the trees, why not map their invisible partners? If we could understand the global distribution of above-ground forest types, why not attempt the same understanding for below-ground networks? Building on this inspiration, researchers proposed explicitly linking trees to their microbial partners in global databases, creating integrated maps that show both the visible and invisible components of forest ecosystems. This proposal has begun to be realized through projects that combine tree distribution data with fungal occurrence data, climate information with soil chemistry measurements, creating multi-layered atlases that reveal forests in their full complexity. One of these efforts has been called the Underground Atlas, a comprehensive mapping project that shows not just where mycorrhizal networks exist but also how well protected they are. And the results are sobering. The Underground Atlas shows that most ecosystems with extensive mycorrhizal networks remain unprotected. They exist outside of parks and preserves, vulnerable to logging, to agricultural conversion, to development. The ancient networks that took millennia to develop could be destroyed in years or decades if these forests aren't actively protected. The Wood Wide Web Atlas represents something unprecedented in scale. Never before have scientists attempted to map underground ecological networks across the entire planet. Never before have we had tools capable of integrating such vast amounts of data, of making predictions at such large scales, of revealing patterns that span continents and biomes. These atlases are still being refined, still being improved as new data becomes available and as our understanding deepens. But they already represent a remarkable achievement, a new way of seeing forests that acknowledges the hidden half, the underground dimension that shapes everything above. As you listen to these final words about the Wood Wide Web, as sleep perhaps begins to claim you, consider what these maps represent. They're not just scientific tools, not just data visualizations. They're a recognition that forests are more than what we can see, that understanding them requires looking beneath the surface, that the connections binding trees together are as important as the trees themselves. For most of history, we were blind to these networks. Now, we're beginning to see them, to map them, to understand their importance. We're learning that every forest conceals an underground world of staggering complexity and beauty, a hidden dimension where cooperation and communication happen on scales we're only beginning to comprehend. The Wood Wide Web stretches beneath forests all around our planet, connecting trees from the Arctic to the tropics, linking individuals into communities, communities into ecosystems, ecosystems into a global network of life that has been operating for hundreds of millions of years. It's been there all along, waiting beneath our feet, functioning whether we understood it or not. But now we know. Now we can see, through the maps and models and data that scientists have painstakingly assembled, the true nature of forests as connected, communicating, cooperating systems held together by the ancient partnerships between plants and fungi. The Wood Wide Web is real. It's vast. And it's one of the most remarkable features of life on Earth, a hidden architecture that supports the forests we depend on, that shapes the climate we live in, that connects everything in ways we're still discovering. Rest now, with the knowledge that beneath every forest, connections run deep, binding life together in an underground web of almost unimaginable scale and complexity.